In this lecture, we're going to take a look at politics and ideology. And we want to make sure to distinguish political science, which is the study of this subject, from an ideological point of view. Because ideology is one of the things that we study when we take a look at politics. It is one facet of it. It is about political thought and political action, right? So we're going to be looking at the ideologies of others. So we don't need to necessarily accept these, but we want to understand these. Now, this term ideology, it's actually first used during the French Revolution in the 18th century, and it's basically a model of what we think should happen, and then a call to action, what should happen from that, right? That's at base ideology. So what an ideology then does is it's going to combine empiricism and normative theory. So it's going to look at the world and say, here's the way the world is, therefore here's the way the world should be. As a result, what makes an ideology unique is it will have this call to action. It promotes a specific order or a specific thing we ought to do, right? So the proletariat should revolt. We should have free markets. Trade should be open among people, right? States should have most of the power. And they both have ideologies, that is, both reflect the historical circumstances of a particular situation, but they will also oftentimes shape the historical circumstances of a political situation. So it's difficult to understand, say, some of the transformations in Europe without understanding Marxism or without understanding capitalism. So what we're going to do here is go through some of the major ideologies. And we're going to begin with kind of that basic one, which is liberalism. And liberalism is going to be about liberty, tolerance, and individualism, with a big focus on people as being discrete individuals. And there are two major versions of liberalism. There is classical, and there is social. And in the United States, for the most part, when somebody says you're a liberal, we're thinking about this kind. But there's really two kinds. Classical is about negative liberty. It says that I should be able to have freedom from the state. So I should be able to trade freely, I'm an autonomous individual living my life, and I should be able to do the things that I want to do. Social liberalism also focuses on the individual, but it says that to kind of fulfill this individualistic identity, we need the state. So the big difference between these two is classical liberals want a small state, and social liberals are going to want a bigger state. But there's going to be a lot of other things that will, like, focuses on the individual, that will overlap both of these. Oftentimes in the United States, you'll see classical liberals, some of them, they are called libertarians. So the next one we're going to take a look at, the next ideology, is socialism. And socialism has lots of different kinds. It begins in 1827 and is really a child of the Industrial Revolution and is associated with the emergence of an industrial working class. And so in socialism, there's really another big split. There is revolutionary socialism, and there is evolutionary socialism. Revolutionary socialism is going to argue that you get socialism, you get the best things by having it happen now. It occurs, we're going to overthrow the order. So the call to action in socialism is that for society to be equal, we are going to have a takeover of that society. That's revolutionary. Evolutionary says to get to equality, which is the goal of socialism, we're going to get there slowly and through elections. In other words, we will work through the state channels. So just like with liberalism, a revolutionary socialist wants to overthrow the state, an evolutionary socialist wants to work within the state to advance this idea of equality, social and economic equality specifically. Going hand in hand with socialism is another ideology, Marxism. Marxism, which comes from Karl Marx, is a kind of socialism. And it argues that, again, we want to have complete equality of people. But the way we're going to get to that is it's deterministic. That means it's deterministic. That means that things must happen. And so for a Marxist, slowly but surely, what will eventually occur is socialism. It will eventually occur because history inevitably drives toward that point. So Marxism says that one day the proletariat will overthrow the bourgeoisie in capitalism and move society forward. And that's more or less Marxism. Marxism's one specific version of socialism. Conservatism. Conservatism is interested in keeping the status quo. And that means that it will vary from circumstance to circumstance. What makes conservatism particularly difficult to understand is that it is pragmatic. It argues that it should not be an abstract principle. In other words, it should be about the things on the ground. It should be anti-theory. We oftentimes call this, it has an aversion to rationalism. It's a reaction to the Enlightenment. It says that society is far more like an organic creature, and therefore you can't just, if you don't like this arm, you can't just cut the arm off and put a new arm on. Rather, you have to deal with the arm that you have. You need to conserve it, make it better, mend it, etc. So conservatism is going to be this much slower and tied to the past and ultimate ideals. Fascism. One that you've probably heard once or twice as a result of World War II, because some of the best expressions of them are Mussolini and Hitler, or Mein Kampf in 1926. But in this, fascism, the state confers meaning upon individual lives, and as a result, individuals are supposed to be subservient to the state, and this is the justification for what's called totalitarianism. The idea that the state should be in control of everything, the total individual, all parts of life. And so inherent in fascism is this deep elitism that some individuals are superior to other individuals. So where liberalism says, look, we have individuals and they should kind of all be equal in their starting points. Fascism says, no, that some individuals are better. As a matter of fact, some specific versions of fascism will include racism, arguing that some races are superior to other races. And that's, a matter of fact, what you see happening with Hitler in World War I. Next, we have anarchism. Anarchism argues that there ought not be a state. States, basically, are bad. Instead, if you want to have the most happiness, freedom, you want to kill the state thing and move on with life. So anarchists argue not, usually when you say anarchist, you're thinking of like mobs and those kinds of things in the street. But what an anarchist is actually saying is that the best society, the most orderly, most free society will be one that throws off the shackles of the state and allows individuals to do what they will in their private lives. In other words, extend the private sphere to everything. Finally, we have fundamentalism, and this is one that has taken on new importance for many in the post-9/11 world. Fundamentalism is an ideology that is going to argue that at base there should be religious principles. Now, the problem with this term is that it actually derives from a Christian source. So it's really kind of a bad name. There were some Christians who argued that they believed in the fundamentals, which was a number of doctrines and theories that came from a series of books. But this word gets thrown around again to really mean government by religious principle, right? There are actually other better words, but we'll use this one here just so we kind of, this is what's used popularly. But know that it is a flawed term, and then in more technical circles that we wouldn't talk about fundamentalism, but because of its connections to Christianity. But rather what we're really referring to is when you think the call to action of this ideology as that religion should be the driving force in a state.